Welcome to Murder Midnight, a crime storytelling channel for sleeping, where crime meets calm and mystery meets the mind at rest. In tonight's fictional stories, we travel once more through time and history. But before we close our eyes and start, please comment what country you are tuning in from. It will greatly help us here at Murder Midnight. Okay, let's start with story number 1. The Pharaoh's Scribe. Thebes, Kingdom of Egypt, 15th year of Pharaoh Ramesses II, 1265 BC. Chief scribe Amenhotep stood in the shadow of the great temple of Karnak, watching the morning sun illuminate the massive columns that rose like a forest of stone toward the heavens. At 38, he served as one of Egypt's most trusted administrators, responsible for investigating crimes that touched upon the complex religious, political, and economic life of the greatest empire in the ancient world. The papyrus message that had summoned him from his morning offerings to Thoth carried news that threatened to shake the very foundations of pharaonic authority. The hieroglyphic text bore urgent symbols. To the chief scribe Amenhotep, beloved of Thoth, keeper of Ma'at's justice, a most grave matter has occurred in the sacred precinct. The high priest Kentika has been found dead in the sanctuary of Amun-Ra under circumstances that suggest impurity and disorder. The pharaoh's Ka depends upon your wisdom to restore the cosmic balance. High priest Kentika was indeed one of the most powerful men in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh Ramesses II himself in religious authority. His death under suspicious circumstances could threaten the divine order that maintained Egypt's prosperity and security, especially during a time when the kingdom faced challenges from Hittite expansion in the north and Nubian unrest in the south. Thebes in the 15th year of Ramesses II was the religious capital of the greatest empire the world had yet known. The city stretched along both banks of the sacred Nile, its massive temples, royal palaces, and administrative buildings reflecting the wealth that flowed into Egypt from tribute, trade, and conquest. The population of nearly 100,000 included Egyptians, Nubians, Asiatics, and people from dozens of other nations who served the pharaoh's empire. Amenhotep had risen from humble origins as a village scribe to become one of Egypt's most respected administrators through his mastery of hieroglyphic writing, mathematics, law, and the complex religious knowledge necessary for high office. His investigations required understanding not only criminal behavior, but also the intricate relationships between divine will, royal authority, and cosmic order that governed Egyptian civilization. The religious precinct of Karnak was the largest temple complex in the world, a vast area of sanctuaries, halls, and administrative buildings that employed thousands of priests, scribes, craftsmen, and servants. The temple controlled enormous wealth in land, livestock, and precious goods, making it both a spiritual center and an economic powerhouse that rivaled Pharaoh's own treasury. Amenhotep was met at the temple entrance by Hui, the second prophet of Amun, whose administrative duties included maintaining security and order within the sacred precinct. Hui was a man of 50 with a dignified bearing and shaved head that marked him as a member of the highest priestly ranks. Chief scribe Amenhotep, may the gods preserve you. This is indeed a dark day for all who serve the divine order. Kentika was not only our spiritual leader, but a wise administrator who maintained harmony between the temple and the royal court. Second prophet Hui, may Amun-Ra strengthen you in this time of trial. Please describe the circumstances in which Kentika's body was discovered. I found him in the inner sanctuary of Amun-Ra when I came to perform the dawn rituals. He was lying before the altar, and there was blood on his linen robes and on the sacred vessels. Was anything disturbed in the sanctuary besides the blood? The sacred serpent crown of Amun appeared to have been moved, and there were signs that someone had searched through the ritual objects and papyrus scrolls kept in the sanctuary. This suggested that the killer had been looking for specific items rather than simply murdering the high priest, indicating knowledge of the temple's sacred objects and possibly religious or political motives beyond personal revenge. Who else had access to the inner sanctuary? Only the highest-ranking priests and certain royal officials who serve as liaisons between the temple and Pharaoh's court. Perhaps 20 people in total have the authority to enter the most sacred areas. Amenhotep examined the sanctuary carefully, noting details that might reveal the identity of the killer or the purpose of the crime. The chamber was magnificent even by Egyptian standards, with walls covered in gold leaf and precious stones, ceiling paintings depicting the journey of the sun god through the underworld, and ritual objects made from the finest materials available to the empire. Kentika's body lay near the altar where the daily offerings were made to Amun-Ra. The high priest was a man of perhaps 60, with the refined features and well-maintained physique typical of the priestly elite. His death wound appeared to be a single thrust to the chest with a narrow blade, possibly a ceremonial knife used in temple rituals. Hui, what was Kentika working on in recent days? Were there any disputes or controversies involving the temple administration? The high priest had been involved in negotiations with Pharaoh's court about temple finances and the allocation of resources for Ramesses' building projects. There were also theological discussions about certain ritual practices that some priests felt were being modified inappropriately. Both issues could provide motives for murder if they had created serious conflicts between different factions within the temple hierarchy or between religious and royal authorities. What kind of modifications to ritual practices? Some younger priests, influenced by foreign ideas brought by captured scribes and craftsmen, had been suggesting changes to traditional ceremonies. Kentika was trying to balance respect for ancient traditions with accommodation of new knowledge. Who opposed these modifications most strongly? Amenemheb, the third prophet, has been vocal in defending traditional practices. He felt that foreign influences were corrupting the purity of Egyptian religious observance. And who supported the modifications? Kaimwaset, the chief lector priest, believed that incorporating new knowledge could enhance the effectiveness of our rituals and strengthen Egypt's divine protection. The theological dispute added another dimension to the investigation, as religious conservatives and reformers might both have had motives for eliminating a high priest who was trying to find middle ground between their positions. Amenhotep's first interview was with Amenemheb, the traditionalist third prophet who had opposed ritual modifications. They met in Amenemheb's office within the temple complex, a chamber decorated with traditional religious texts and images that emphasize continuity with ancient practices. Amenemheb was a man of 55 with the austere manner of someone devoted to preserving traditional religious purity. His library contained exclusively Egyptian religious texts, with no foreign works or innovative interpretations. Amenemheb, the death of High Priest Kentika is a tragedy for all who serve the gods. What are your thoughts about this terrible event? Kentika was a faithful servant of Amun-Ra, though I sometimes felt he was too willing to accommodate foreign influences that threaten the purity of our sacred traditions. What kind of foreign influences concerned you? Captured Hittite and Nubian scribes have been suggesting modifications to our ritual practices based on their own religious customs. I feared that such accommodations could weaken the divine protection that has made Egypt great. Did you discuss these concerns with Kentika directly? Many times, the high priest was always respectful of my views, but he felt that adapting to new circumstances was necessary for maintaining the temple's effectiveness. Did these discussions ever become heated or contentious? We had strong disagreements, but always within the bounds of proper religious discourse. I respected Kentika's authority even when I disagreed with his decisions. Amenemheb, where were you when Kentika was killed? In my quarters, studying ritual texts and preparing for the morning ceremonies. My servants can confirm my presence throughout the night. Despite his opposition to certain policies, Amenemheb seemed genuinely saddened by the high priest's death and showed no signs of personal animosity that might motivate murder. Kamwaset, the chief lector priest who had supported ritual modifications, presented a different perspective on the theological disputes. His office was filled with a diverse collection of religious texts, including Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and other foreign works that reflected his interest in comparative religious practices. Kaimwaset was a man of 40 with the intellectual manner of someone who spent considerable time studying and analyzing religious practices from different cultures. Chief scribe Amenhotep, Kentika's death is a great loss to those of us who believe that Egyptian religion must continue to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. What kind of adaptations did you and Kentika discuss? We were exploring ways to incorporate useful elements from foreign religious practices while maintaining the essential character of Egyptian worship. For example, certain Nubian purification rituals could enhance our own cleansing ceremonies. Who opposed these adaptations? Some of our more conservative colleagues felt that any foreign influence was inherently corrupting. They preferred to maintain traditional practices exactly as they had been performed for centuries. Did these theological disagreements create serious tensions within the temple hierarchy? There were debates, but I thought they were healthy expressions of our commitment to serving the gods effectively. I was surprised by the intensity of some colleagues' opposition to any change. Kayamwa said, "Did Kentika seem concerned about threats to his safety or his position?" He mentioned receiving criticism from both royal officials and some priests, but he did not seem to fear for his life. Kentika was confident in his ability to balance different interests and maintain harmony. Where were you when the high priest was murdered? In the temple library, working on translations of Mesopotamian religious texts. Several scribes can confirm my presence there throughout the night. The chief lector priest's alibi seemed credible, and his manner suggested someone more interested in scholarly debate than violent confrontation. Amenhotep's investigation took a different direction when he learned that Kentika had been involved in disputes with royal officials about temple finances and resources for Pharaoh's building projects. This information came from Senimut, the royal treasurer who managed the complex financial relationships between different government departments and institutions. Chief scribe Amenhotep, the high priest's death creates serious problems for managing the royal construction projects that depend on temple resources. What was the nature of the financial disputes between Kentika and the royal administration? Pharaoh Ramesses has been undertaking the most ambitious building program in Egyptian history. The projects require enormous amounts of materials, labor, and funding that must come from various sources, including temple resources. Did Kentika resist providing these resources? He was concerned about maintaining the temple's ability to perform its religious duties while also supporting the royal projects. Kentika sought compromises that would serve both religious and royal interests. Who disagreed with his approach? Some royal officials felt the temple was being selfish and unpatriotic. They argued that supporting Pharaoh's glory was a religious duty that should take precedence over other temple activities. Can you provide names of officials who held such views? Vizier Pacer has been particularly vocal about the need for temples to contribute more generously to royal projects. General Seti, who commands the Royal Guard, has also expressed frustration with what he sees as temple reluctance to support Pharaoh's needs. Both officials would have had access to the temple and strong motives for eliminating a high priest who stood in the way of royal resource extraction. Senenmut, how much money and resources were involved in these disputes? Enormous sums, enough to fund military campaigns or major construction projects. The temple controls resources that rival Pharaoh's own treasury. This financial dimension added another potential motive for murder, as the stakes involved were sufficient to justify extreme measures by those seeking to redirect temple wealth toward royal projects. Amenhotep's interview with Vizier Pacer took place in the royal administrative complex, where the kingdom's highest officials managed the affairs of an empire that stretched from Nubia to Syria. Pacer was a man of 50 with the confident bearing and expensive clothing that marked him as one of Egypt's most powerful officials. His office was decorated with maps of the empire and architectural plans for the massive construction projects that were transforming Egypt's landscape. Vizier Pacer, the death of High Priest Kentikai affects not only religious affairs, but also the royal projects that depend on temple cooperation. Indeed, Chief Scribe, Kentika's death is unfortunate, but it may create opportunities for better coordination between religious and royal priorities. What kind of coordination problems had you experienced with Kentika? The high priest was overly protective of temple resources that could be better used for projects that glorify Pharaoh and demonstrate Egypt's greatness to foreign enemies. Did you consider his position unreasonable? I considered it short-sighted. Temple wealth comes ultimately from Pharaoh's military victories and diplomatic successes. Using that wealth to support royal projects is simply returning resources to their proper source. Did you discuss these issues with Kentika directly? Several times. I tried to explain that supporting Pharaoh's building program was a religious duty, but Kentika remained concerned about maintaining temple independence. How did these discussions conclude? Without resolution, Kentika insisted on maintaining control over temple resources, while I felt that royal needs should take precedence. Vizier Pacer, where were you when Kentika was murdered? in the royal palace working on administrative matters related to the Syrian provinces. Several scribes and officials can confirm my presence throughout the evening. Despite the apparent alibi, Amenhotep noted that the vizier had both strong motives for eliminating Kentika and the authority to arrange for the murder to be carried out by subordinates. General Seti commanded the royal guard and oversaw security for the pharaoh and major government institutions. His military background and access to trained soldiers made him a particularly dangerous potential suspect. Amenhotep found the general at the military headquarters near the royal palace, reviewing reports from Egypt's frontier garrisons and planning responses to various external threats. Seti was a man of 45 with the scarred hands and alert manner of a professional soldier who had risen through the ranks during Egypt's recent military campaigns. General Seti, I understand you had concerns about temple cooperation with royal military and construction projects. Chief Scribe, Egypt faces serious external threats that require maximum mobilization of our resources. Every institution, including the temples, must contribute to our common defense. Did you feel that High Priest Kentika was not adequately supporting these efforts? Kentika seemed more concerned with temple privileges than with the security needs that protect all Egyptians, including the priests. What kind of additional support did you expect from the temple? Resources for military equipment, funding for fortifications, and manpower for construction projects that strengthen Egypt's defensive capabilities. Did you discuss these needs with Kentika personally? I explained that military security was the foundation that made religious activities possible, but Kentika remained focused on what he saw as temple prerogatives. How did you respond to his position? I warned him that failure to support Pharaoh's military needs could have serious consequences for temple security and independence. What kind of consequences? I pointed out that temples depend on royal protection from foreign enemies and internal disorder. Without adequate military strength, religious institutions could not function safely. General Seti, could your warning have been interpreted as a threat? I intended it as a factual observation about political and military realities, not as a personal threat against Kentika. Where were you when the high priest was murdered? At the military compound, meeting with garrison commanders about frontier security. Several officers can confirm my presence. While General Seti's alibi seemed credible, his military background and access to trained killers made him a serious suspect who could have arranged the murder through subordinates. The breakthrough in the case came when Amenhotep discovered that someone had been systematically removing and copying temple records related to land ownership, tax exemptions, and religious endowments. This information emerged when he found discrepancies between the temple's master records and certain documents that had been requested by royal officials for administrative review. The pattern suggested that someone was gathering detailed information about temple resources in preparation for a major reorganization of religious royal financial relationships. Hey, has anyone been conducting systematic reviews of temple financial records recently? Several royal officials have requested access to our archives for what they claimed were routine administrative purposes. Who made these requests? Mainly scribes working for Vizier Passer and General Seti. They said they needed the information for planning construction projects and military supply operations. Did Kentika approve these requests? He was reluctant, but felt he could not refuse direct requests from such high-ranking officials. However, he insisted that temple scribes supervise any access to sensitive records. Who supervised this access? Mostly Jehuti, our chief archivist, who has been responsible for maintaining and organizing temple records for over 20 years. Jehuti proved to be a crucial witness whose testimony revealed the true scope of the conspiracy against Kentika and the temple's independence. Chief Scribe Amenhotep, I have been concerned about the royal officials' interest in our records. Their questions went beyond what would be necessary for legitimate administrative purposes. What kind of questions were they asking? They wanted detailed information about land holdings, income sources, religious endowments, and legal exemptions that protect temple property from royal taxation. Did you report these concerns to High Priest Kentika? Yes, and he was planning to restrict future access to our most sensitive records. Kentika felt that royal officials were gathering information that could be used to challenge temple independence. Did anyone know about Kentika's plan to restrict access? He had discussed it with the senior priest and had sent a message to Vizier Passer explaining that future requests for temple records would need more specific justification. This message could have provided the immediate trigger for Kentika's murder if royal officials had decided that the high priest's resistance to their information gathering needed to be eliminated permanently. Further investigation revealed that Vizier Pacer had been developing a comprehensive plan to reorganize temple finances and redirect religious resources toward royal projects. The plan required detailed knowledge of temple assets and legal vulnerabilities that could be exploited to justify increased royal control. Kentika's resistance to this plan and his decision to restrict access to temple records had made him an obstacle that needed to be removed for the reorganization to proceed. The murder had been carried out by one of General Seti's trusted subordinates, a military scribe named Horemheb, who had both the skills necessary to kill silently and the knowledge of temple layout needed to gain access to the inner sanctuary. When confronted with evidence of the conspiracy, both Pacer and Seti initially denied involvement, but eventually confessed when faced with testimony from Horemheb, who had been promised clemency in exchange for revealing the full details of the plot. "We did not plan to kill Kentika initially," Pacer admitted. "We hoped to convince him to cooperate voluntarily with our resource reallocation plans." "What changed your approach?" "The high priest's decision to restrict our access to temple records threatened to expose our broader reorganization strategy before we could implement it properly." "So you decided that murder was necessary?" "We felt that replacing Kentika with a more cooperative high priest was essential for serving Pharaoh's greater glory and Egypt's security needs." "How was the murder carried out?" "Horemheb gained access to the temple through his military credentials and eliminated Kentika during the night when the sanctuary would be empty." "What were you planning to do after the murder?" "Install a new high priest who would be more willing to coordinate temple resources with royal priorities and who would support our administrative reforms." The confessions revealed that Kentika had been killed not for personal reasons, but as part of a broader conspiracy to restructure the relationship between religious and royal authority in Egypt. The trials of the conspirators were conducted according to Egyptian legal principles, with Pharaoh Ramesses II serving as the ultimate judge and a panel of senior officials determining appropriate punishments. Vizier Pacer and General Seti were sentenced to death for treason against the divine order, while Horemheb was executed for murder in violation of sacred space. The severity of the punishments reflected the seriousness of crimes that threatened the cosmic balance upon which Egyptian civilization depended. The case established important precedents for protecting religious independence from royal encroachment, while also defining the limits of temple resistance to legitimate government needs. For the Egyptian religious establishment, Kentika's murder served as a warning about the dangers of political involvement and the need for careful balance between temple independence and royal loyalty. The investigation enhanced Amenhotep's reputation as an administrator capable of unraveling complex political conspiracies while maintaining the religious principles that governed Egyptian justice. The case also demonstrated the ongoing tensions between different sources of authority in Egyptian society and the challenges of managing an empire where religious, military, and administrative interests sometimes conflicted. In his final report to Pharaoh Ramesses II, Amenhotep wrote, "The murder of High Priest Kentika represents an attack upon the divine order that maintains Egypt's greatness. The investigation has revealed how individual ambition can threaten the cosmic balance that protects our civilization from chaos and disorder." The case became part of Egyptian administrative and legal tradition, serving as an example of how careful investigation could protect religious institutions from political conspiracy while maintaining the unity necessary for imperial strength. Kentika was succeeded as high priest by a more politically flexible leader who managed to balance temple independence with royal needs, avoiding the conflicts that had led to his predecessor's murder. The Temple of Karnak continued to serve as Egypt's primary religious center for many more centuries, while the precedents established by the investigation influenced Egyptian law and administration throughout the New Kingdom period. Amenhotep continued to serve as chief scribe for many more years, investigating cases that range from simple theft to complex political conspiracies. But the Kentika case remained the most significant of his career, a reminder that even in the most divinely ordered societies, human ambition could threaten the stability and justice that made great civilizations possible. The pharaoh's scribe had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of Egyptian religious and political order. But through careful investigation and fair justice, the divine balance had been restored and the kingdom's security preserved for future generations. Story 2. The Feathered Serpent's Justice. Tenochtitlan, Aztec Empire, 13th year of Tlatoani, Axayacatl, 1481 AD. Tlaquelo, judge of the sacred court, stood on the stone platform overlooking the great plaza of Tenochtitlan, watching the morning mist rise from Lake Texcoco as thousands of citizens began their daily activities in the greatest city of the Americas. At 42, he served as one of the most respected judicial officials in the Aztec Empire, responsible for investigating crimes that touched upon the complex religious, political, and social life of a civilization that ruled over 15 million people across central Mexico. The codex message, painted in bright pigments on amate bark paper, bore urgent glyphs: to Tlaquelel, Speaker of Justice, Keeper of the Sacred Law. A grave matter has occurred that threatens the cosmic balance. Tlacahuepan, the master of the Feathered Serpent Temple, has been found dead under circumstances that suggest violation of the sacred order. The Huey Tlatoani commands your immediate investigation to restore harmony between the mortal and divine realms. Tlacahuepan was indeed one of the most powerful religious figures in the empire, serving as high priest of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity associated with wisdom, learning, and the wind. His death under suspicious circumstances could threaten the delicate balance of forces that maintained the empire's prosperity and the favor of the gods, who demanded constant attention and proper ritual observance. Tenochtitlan in the 13th year of Axayacatl was perhaps the most magnificent city in the world, built on islands and artificial platforms in the middle of Lake Texcoco and connected to the mainland by great causeways. The city's population of over 200,000 made it larger than any European city of the time, while its sophisticated engineering, architecture, and urban planning reflected the advanced civilization that the Aztecs had created in the Valley of Mexico. Tlaxcala had risen from modest origins as the son of a skilled craftsman to become one of the empire's most trusted judges through his mastery of the complex legal code that governed Aztec society, his knowledge of religious ritual and astronomical calculation, and his reputation for fairness in resolving disputes between different social classes and ethnic groups within the empire. The investigation would require understanding not only criminal behavior, but also the intricate relationships between different deities, priestly hierarchies, and the political factions that competed for influence in the imperial court. Any disruption of religious harmony could affect everything from agricultural fertility to military success, making crimes involving high priests matters of imperial security. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl stood near the center of Tenochtitlan's sacred precinct, a massive pyramid complex dedicated to the feathered serpent and surrounded by smaller temples, priestly residences, and schools where noble children learn the reading of codices, astronomical calculation, and ritual performance. The temple employed hundreds of priests, students, and servants who maintained the constant ceremonies required to ensure divine favor. Tlaquelo was met at the temple entrance by Itzal, the second priest of Quetzalcoatl, whose administrative duties included maintaining order and security within the temple complex. Itzal was a man of 50 with the ritual scars and elaborate tattoos that marked him as a senior member of the priestly hierarchy. Judge Tlaquelel, may the feathered serpent guide your wisdom in this dark time. Master Tlacahuepan was not only our spiritual leader, but a wise counselor who maintained harmony between our temple and the other religious institutions of the city. Second priest Itzal, may Quetzalcoatl illuminate the truth. Please describe the circumstances in which Tlacahuepan's body was discovered. I found him in the inner sanctuary when I came to perform the dawn rituals. He was lying before the altar of the feathered serpent, and there was blood on his ceremonial robes and on the sacred objects used in our rituals. Was anything disturbed in the sanctuary besides the blood? The codices containing our most sacred astronomical calculations appeared to have been searched, and some of the ritual implements were out of their proper places. This suggested that the killer had been looking for specific information or objects rather than simply murdering the high priest, indicating possible motives involving the temple's scholarly or ceremonial activities. Who else had access to the inner sanctuary? Only the highest-ranking priests and certain imperial officials who serve as liaisons between our temple and the Huey Tlatoani's court. Perhaps 15 people in total have the authority to enter the most sacred areas. Tlacaelel examined the sanctuary with the careful attention that Aztec justice demanded. The chamber was magnificent, with walls covered in colorful murals depicting Quetzalcoatl's role in creating humanity and bringing civilization to the world. Carved stone serpents wound around columns supporting a ceiling painted with astronomical symbols, while altars held ritual objects made from gold, jade, and precious feathers. Tlacohuipan's body lay near the main altar, positioned as if he had been making offerings when attacked. The high priest was a man of perhaps 55, with the elongated skull and ritual scarification that marked him as a member of the highest noble class. His death wound appeared to be from an obsidian blade, the sharp volcanic glass that Aztec warriors and priests used for both warfare and religious ceremonies. Itzel, what was Tlacohuipan working on in recent days? Were there any disputes or controversies involving the temple? The master had been involved in discussions with other high priests about the proper interpretation of recent astronomical observations and their implications for the empire's future. What kind of astronomical observations? Unusual movements of Venus and certain star formations that some priests interpreted as warnings about threats to the empire. There were disagreements about how these signs should be communicated to the Huey Tlatoani. Such astronomical disputes could have serious political implications, as the Aztec rulers depended heavily on priestly advice about the cosmic forces that influence military campaigns, agricultural cycles, and other crucial decisions. Who disagreed with Tlacohuipan's interpretations? Xochitl, the high priestess of Tlazolteotl, felt that the signs indicated a need for increased human sacrifice to appease the gods. Tlacohuipan believed that ritual purification and increased offerings of flowers and incense would be sufficient. What about the other temples? Were there institutional rivalries or conflicts? There had been some tension with the temple of Huitzilopochtli, whose priests felt that too much attention was being given to peaceful deities like Quetzalcoatl when the empire faced military threats from unconquered peoples. The temple of Huitzilopochtli, dedicated to the Aztec war god, was the most powerful religious institution in the empire and could view the growing influence of Quetzalcoatl's more peaceful worship as a threat to their own authority and resources. Tlacaelel's first interview was with Xochitl, the high priestess of Tlazolteotl, goddess of fertility, sexuality, and purification. The priestess received him in her temple's administrative chambers, surrounded by codices and ritual objects that reflected her expertise in healing, divination, and the complex ceremonies associated with female deities. Xochitl was a woman of 45 with the intricate tattoos and jade ornaments that marked her high status within the religious hierarchy. Her temple was one of the few where women could achieve positions of significant authority, making her one of the most powerful female figures in the empire. Judge Tlacaelel, Tlacohuipan's death diminishes all who serve the divine order. He was a learned man, though I sometimes felt his interpretations of celestial signs were insufficiently urgent given the threats facing our empire. High Priestess Xochitl, what were the nature of your disagreements with Tlacohuipan about astronomical observations? Recent signs in the heavens clearly indicate that the gods are displeased with something in our religious observances. I believe that increased blood sacrifice was necessary to restore divine favor, while Tlacohuipan preferred gentler approaches. Did these disagreements create serious tensions between your temples? We had scholarly debates, but nothing that should have led to violence. Tlacohuipan was always respectful of other viewpoints, even when he disagreed with them. What specific signs had you observed that concerned you? Unusual behavior of Venus, strange cloud formations, and reports from provincial priests about omens involving animals and plants. Taken together, these signs suggested that major changes were coming. High Priestess, did Tlacohuipan seem concerned about threats to his safety? He mentioned receiving criticism from some quarters about his moderate approach to ritual observance, but he did not seem to fear for his life. Where were you when Tlacohuipan was murdered? In my temple, conducting night-long purification ceremonies with several other priestesses. The rituals continued until dawn, and many people can confirm my presence. Despite their theological disagreements, Xochitl seemed genuinely saddened by Tlacohuipan's death, and showed no signs of personal animosity that might motivate murder. Tlacaelel's next interview was with Tlacaelel. Confusingly, he shared his name with the legendary Aztec noble who served as high priest of Huitzilopochtli and was one of the most powerful religious figures in the empire. The war god's temple was the largest and most imposing structure in the Tenochtitlan's sacred precinct, a massive pyramid that dominated the city's skyline and where the most important state ceremonies were conducted, including the human sacrifices that the Aztecs believed were necessary to maintain the cosmic order. High Priest Tlacaelel was a man of 50 with a powerful build and elaborate ritual scarification that marked him as a warrior priest who had participated in military campaigns as well as religious ceremonies. His temple controlled enormous resources and wielded significant political influence through its role in state religious observances. Judge Tlacaelel, the death of Master Tlacahupan affects not only his own temple, but the entire religious establishment of the empire. High Priest, I understand there had been some tensions between your temple and the Temple of Quetzalcoatl about religious priorities and resource allocation. In times of military threat, it is natural that the worship of war deities should receive increased attention and support. Tlacahuipan understood this, though he sometimes emphasized peaceful approaches when more vigorous action was required. What kind of military threats were you concerned about? Unconquered peoples in the northern and western regions continue to resist incorporation into the empire. These conflicts require divine support through proper ritual observance and sacrifice. Did you feel that Tlacahuipan's temple was not adequately supporting the military effort? I felt that too much attention was being paid to scholarly activities and astronomical calculations when practical military preparation was more urgently needed. Did you discuss these concerns with Tlacahuipan directly? We had several conversations about the proper balance between different types of religious activity. Tlacahuipan was always respectful, but he remained committed to his scholarly approach. High Priest Tlacaelel, where were you when Master Tlacahuipan was killed? Conducting midnight rituals in the main temple with dozens of other priests. The ceremonies lasted throughout the night and were witnessed by many people. The high priest's alibi seemed credible, but Tlacaelel noted that as head of the most powerful temple, he would have had the authority to arrange for the murder to be carried out by subordinates if he had viewed Tlacahuipan as a serious obstacle to his temple's interests. The investigation took a different direction when Tlacaelel learned that Master Tlacahuipan had been involved in secret discussions with Tloque the imperial chancellor who managed administrative affairs for the Huey Tlatoani. These discussions had apparently involved astronomical calculations related to the timing of military campaigns and the interpretation of celestial omens that could influence imperial policy decisions. Tloque received Tlacaelel in his office within the royal palace complex, surrounded by tribute lists, military reports, and administrative documents that reflected his role in managing the empire's complex governmental machinery. The chancellor was a man of 55 with a refined manner and expensive clothing that marked him as a member of the highest noble class. His position required balancing the competing demands of different regions, ethnic groups, and interest groups within the empire. Judge Tlacaelel, Master Tlacahuipan's death creates serious problems for several imperial projects that depended on his astronomical expertise. Chancellor, what kind of projects required Tlacahuipan's involvement? The Huey Tlatoani relies on astronomical calculations to determine favorable times for military campaigns, major construction projects, and important state ceremonies. Tlacahuipan was one of our most skilled practitioners of these calculations. Were there any disputes about his astronomical interpretations? Some court officials felt that Tlacahuipan was too conservative in his recommendations about military timing. They wanted more aggressive interpretation of celestial signs that would support immediate action against our enemies. Who held such views? General Tlacochcalcatl, who commands our Western armies, has been pressing for immediate campaigns against unconquered territories. He felt that Tlacahuipan's cautious astronomical interpretations were delaying necessary military action. What was Tlacahuipan's position on military timing? He believed that certain astronomical conditions needed to be more favorable before launching major campaigns. Tlacahuipan was concerned that premature action could result in military disasters. Chancellor, did these disagreements create serious tensions between Tlacahuipan and military leaders? There were heated discussions, but I thought they remained within normal bounds of policy debate. I was surprised by the intensity of some military officials' frustration with astronomical advice. Where were you when Tlacohuepan was murdered? In the palace, reviewing tribute reports from the eastern provinces. Several scribes and officials can confirm my presence throughout the night. The chancellor's account revealed another dimension to the case: conflicts between religious and military authorities about the proper timing of imperial policy decisions based on astronomical observations. General Tlacochcalco commanded the Western armies and was known throughout the empire for his successful campaigns against resistant peoples who refused to acknowledge Aztec supremacy. His military reputation made him influential in court discussions about imperial expansion and defense. Tlaquelel found the general at the military headquarters near the royal palace, reviewing maps and reports from frontier garrisons while planning responses to various external threats. Tlacochcalco was a man of 40 with the scarred body and alert manner of a professional warrior who had risen through the ranks during the empire's recent military campaigns. His office was decorated with captured weapons and tribute items that reflected his successful military career. General Tlacochcalco, I understand you had disagreements with Master Tlacohuepan about the timing of military campaigns based on astronomical observations. Judge Tlacoelel, the empire faces serious external threats that require immediate military response. We cannot afford to delay necessary action while priests debate the positions of stars and planets. What specific threats were you concerned about? Several northern peoples have been coordinating resistance to imperial expansion, while western tribes have been raiding our frontier settlements. These threats require prompt military response. Did Tlacohuepan's astronomical interpretations prevent such responses? His conservative readings of celestial signs provided justification for court officials who preferred diplomatic negotiation to military action. Such delays only encourage our enemies. Did you discuss these concerns with Tlacohuepan directly? I explained that military necessity sometimes requires action regardless of astronomical considerations. But Tlacohuepan remained convinced that ignoring celestial warnings could lead to disaster. How did these discussions conclude? Without resolution, Tlacohuepan insisted that astronomical calculations must guide military timing, while I felt that immediate threats required immediate responses. General, where were you when Tlacohuepan was murdered? At the military compound, meeting with officers about frontier defense preparations. Several commanders can confirm my presence throughout the evening. Despite his apparent alibi, General Tlacochcalco's frustration with Tlacohuepan's conservative interpretations provided a clear motive for eliminating the priest whose advice was delaying military campaigns that the general considered essential for imperial security. The breakthrough in the case came when Tlacoelel discovered that someone had been systematically copying and removing astronomical codices from the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, apparently to deny the information to competing interpretations or to use it for unauthorized predictions. This discovery emerged when Itzel reported that several important astronomical calculation manuals were missing from the temple's collection, including works containing mathematical formulas for predicting planetary movements and eclipse timing. Judge Tlacoelel, the missing codices contained our most sophisticated astronomical knowledge, including calculations that take years to develop and verify. Who would have the knowledge necessary to identify which codices were most valuable? Someone with advanced training in astronomical mathematics, either another priest astronomer or a court official with scholarly background. Could the codices be used to make independent astronomical predictions? Yes, and such predictions could be used to challenge or support different policy recommendations without consulting our temple. This suggested that Tlacohuepan might have been killed not only to remove his influence, but also to steal the astronomical knowledge that gave his temple authority in imperial decision-making. Further investigation revealed that the stolen codices had been copied by Necali, a young priest scribe who worked in the temple's astronomical calculation center and who had access to the most sensitive mathematical and observational records. When confronted with evidence of the theft, Necali initially denied involvement, but eventually confessed to both a copying scheme and the murder. I never intended to kill Master Tlacohuepan, Necali admitted. I went to the sanctuary that night to retrieve the original codices I had been copying, but he discovered me. Why were you stealing the astronomical codices? General Tlacochcocal had promised me advancement and wealth if I could provide him with astronomical knowledge that would support his military plans without requiring consultation with our temple. What happened during your confrontation with Tlacohuapan? The master was furious about my betrayal of the temple's trust. He said he would report my theft to the imperial court and ensure that I was punished according to the full severity of the law. So you killed him to prevent exposure? I panicked. Master Tlacohuapan had been like a father to me, teaching me the sacred calculations and trusting me with our most precious knowledge. The shame of disappointing him was unbearable, but the thought of facing imperial justice was even worse. What were you planning to do with the stolen codices? General Tlacochcocal wanted to use them to make independent astronomical predictions that would support his military recommendations without being constrained by temple conservatism. Did the general know that you planned to steal the codices? He knew that I was providing him with astronomical information, but I told him I was acting with temple approval. I don't think he realized that I was stealing the knowledge. The confession revealed that Tlacohuapan had been killed not for theological or political reasons, but by someone he had trusted and trained. The murder was a personal betrayal that reflected the intense pressures facing young scholars in the competitive environment of imperial court politics. The trial of Necali was conducted according to Aztec legal principles, with the Huey Tlatoani Axayacatl serving as final judge and a council of senior nobles and priests determining appropriate punishment. The prosecution argued for the death penalty, noting that Necali had not only committed murder, but had also violated the sacred trust that made astronomical knowledge possible and had betrayed the temple that had provided his education and livelihood. The defense pleaded for mercy, emphasizing Necali's youth, his previous good service to the temple, and his genuine remorse for the crime. They argued that the murder had been unpremeditated and had resulted from panic rather than malicious intent. The court ultimately sentenced Necali to ritual sacrifice to Quetzalcoatl, the deity whose temple he had betrayed. However, in recognition of his confession and cooperation with the investigation, the execution was conducted with honors appropriate to his scholarly achievements, rather than as a punishment for common criminals. General Tlacochcocal was disciplined for attempting to circumvent proper channels for obtaining astronomical advice, but was not charged with directly inciting the murder since he had not known about Necali's theft of the codices. The case established important precedents for protecting intellectual property and maintaining the integrity of scholarly institutions within the imperial system. For the Temple of Quetzalcoatl, Tlacohuapan's murder served as a reminder of the need for better security procedures and more careful oversight of students and junior priests who had access to sensitive information. The investigation also highlighted the ongoing tensions between military, religious, and administrative authorities in the Aztec Empire and the challenges of managing complex decision-making processes that involved multiple types of expertise. Tlacohuapan's handling of the case enhanced his reputation as a judge, capable of unraveling complex political and scholarly conspiracies while maintaining the religious principles that governed Aztec justice. The murder also sparked discussions about the proper relationship between military necessity and religious guidance, leading to new procedures for coordinating astronomical advice with imperial policy decisions. In his final report to Huey Tlatoani Axayacatl, Tlacohuapan wrote, "The murder of Master Tlacohuapan represents not only the loss of a great priest-scholar, but a violation of the sacred trust that makes learning and wisdom possible. The empire must protect both its scholars and its knowledge, while ensuring that such knowledge serves the greater good of all our people." The case became part of Aztec legal and scholarly tradition, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing political ambition to corrupt academic integrity and the importance of maintaining proper channels for utilizing specialized knowledge in imperial decision-making. Tlacohuapan was succeeded as master of the temple by a priest who had been trained in both astronomical calculation and diplomatic negotiation, helping to bridge the gap between scholarly and practical approaches to imperial advice. The Temple of Quetzalcoatl continued to serve as one of the empire's primary centers of learning and astronomical observation until the Spanish conquest 40 years later destroyed the Aztec civilization and scattered its scholars. Tlacohuapan continued to serve as a judge for many more years, investigating cases that range from simple theft to complex political conspiracies. But the Tlacohuepan case remained the most intellectually challenging of his career. A reminder that even in the most sophisticated scholarly environments, human weakness could lead to tragedy. The feathered serpent's justice had been served through careful investigation and fair legal procedures. But the case also revealed the ongoing tensions between different sources of authority and expertise that would continue to challenge the Aztec Empire until its eventual destruction by external conquest. In the great city of Tenochtitlan, where learning and ritual maintained the cosmic balance that protected civilization from chaos, the memory of Master Tlacohuepan and the lessons learned from his tragic death continued to influence scholars and administrators who understood that knowledge was both power and responsibility, requiring wisdom and integrity from those entrusted with its preservation and application. Story 3. The Empress's Shadow, St. Petersburg, Russian Empire, November 1783. Count Pavel Sheremetev adjusted his sable-trimmed coat against the bitter November wind as his sleigh glided through the snow-covered streets of St. Petersburg toward the Winter Palace. At 46, he served as one of Empress Catherine II's most trusted investigators, responsible for examining crimes that touched upon the delicate balance of power, intrigue, and ambition that characterized the glittering but dangerous world of the Imperial Russian court. The sealed letter that had summoned him from his estate bore the imperial eagle and Catherine's personal cipher. My dear Pavel Mikhailovich, a matter of the utmost delicacy has occurred that requires your immediate attention. Prince Dmitry Volkonsky has been found dead in his apartments under circumstances that suggest neither accident nor natural causes. Given his recent involvement in sensitive negotiations regarding our southern expansion, this matter must be resolved with absolute discretion. Prince Volkonsky was indeed one of the empire's most important diplomatic figures, recently returned from secret negotiations in Constantinople regarding Russia's expansion into the Black Sea region and the ongoing tensions with the Ottoman Empire. His suspicious death could have implications far beyond ordinary criminal investigation, potentially affecting the delicate balance of European power that Catherine had been carefully manipulating for over 20 years. St. Petersburg in 1783 was the magnificent capital of Europe's largest empire, a city that embodied Catherine's vision of Russia as a great European power worthy of respect and fear from both allies and enemies. The city's Baroque palaces, broad avenues, and frozen canals reflected the wealth and ambition of an empire that stretched from Poland to the Pacific Ocean, ruled by an empress who had transformed a backward kingdom into a major player in European politics. Count Sheremetev had served Catherine since her early years on the throne, rising from minor nobility to become one of her most valued advisors through his combination of intelligence, discretion, and absolute loyalty to the crown. His investigations had previously uncovered plots against the throne, exposed foreign spies, and resolved delicate matters involving the highest levels of Russian society. The case would require navigating the treacherous currents of court politics, where personal ambition, foreign intrigue, and imperial policy intersected in ways that could make any investigation a threat to powerful interests. In Catherine's Russia, knowledge could be as dangerous as ignorance, and even the most loyal servants could find themselves sacrificed to preserve larger strategic objectives. The Winter Palace dominated St. Petersburg's skyline like a green and white jewel, its Baroque facades and gilded decorations proclaiming Russian power to all who approached the imperial residence. Inside, thousands of courtiers, servants, guards, and administrators maintained the elaborate ceremonial and administrative machinery that governed the world's largest country. Count Sheremetev was received by General Ivan Gudovich, commander of the palace guard and one of Catherine's most trusted military advisors. Gudovich was a man of 50 with the scarred hands and direct manner of a career soldier who had risen through merit rather than birth. Count Sheremetev, Her Imperial Majesty, has expressed personal concern about Prince Volkonsky's death. The circumstances are unusual, and the timing is particularly sensitive given current diplomatic developments. General, what makes you suspect that the prince's death was not natural? The body shows signs of poisoning, according to Dr. Rogerson, the court physician. More significantly, Prince Volkonsky's private papers appear to have been searched, and certain documents related to his recent diplomatic mission are missing. Dr. John Rogerson was Catherine's personal physician, a Scottish doctor whose medical expertise and discretion had made him invaluable to the imperial court. If he suspected poisoning, the diagnosis could be trusted. What kind of documents are missing? Correspondence related to negotiations with Ottoman officials, maps showing proposed territorial adjustments, and reports about military preparations in the southern provinces. Such information could be valuable to foreign powers seeking to understand Russian expansion plans or to domestic opponents who might use knowledge of secret negotiations to undermine Catherine's policies. General who had access to Prince Volkonsky's apartments? As a senior diplomat, the prince maintained quarters in the palace complex. Access was limited to palace personnel, other court officials, and invited guests who had proper authorization. Any record of who visited the prince recently? The palace guards maintain visitor logs, but certain high-ranking individuals are not required to register their movements within the palace complex. This would complicate the investigation, as many potential suspects would have legitimate reasons for being in the area and would not appear in official records. Count Sheremetev examined Prince Volkonsky's apartments, which reflected both his diplomatic status and his personal wealth. The rooms were elegantly furnished with objects that demonstrated his travels throughout Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Turkish carpets, French furniture, German clocks, and Italian paintings that created an atmosphere of cosmopolitan sophistication. The prince's body lay in his private study, positioned as if he had collapsed while working at his desk. Volkonsky was a man of perhaps 55, with the refined features and expensive clothing that marked him as a member of Russia's highest nobility. His death appeared peaceful, showing none of the violent struggle that would characterize assassination by knife or gunshot. Dr. Rogerson provided his medical assessment when Sheremetev examined the body. The Scottish physician was a man of 60, with the careful manner of someone who had learned to balance medical honesty with political necessity. Count Sheremetev, Prince Volkonsky, shows all the signs of acute poisoning, probably administered in food or drink, within a few hours of his death. What kind of poison do you suspect? Most likely arsenic or a similar metallic compound. The symptoms, pallor, traces of vomiting, the position of the body, all suggest a poison that acts relatively quickly but allows time for the victim to realize what is happening. How long would such a poison take to prove fatal? Depending on the dose, anywhere from 2 to 6 hours. The prince would have felt increasingly ill, but might not have immediately recognized the cause of his distress. Dr. Rogerson, was there any evidence of what the prince consumed before his death? There was an empty wine glass on his desk and the remains of what appeared to be a light dinner. I've preserved samples for further analysis, though our methods for detecting specific poisons are limited. This was unfortunately true. While 18th century medicine could recognize symptoms of poisoning, identifying specific toxic substances required techniques that were still primitive by later standards. Count Sheremetev's examination of the prince's papers revealed the scope of his recent diplomatic work and the sensitive nature of the information that had been stolen. Volkonsky had been negotiating with Ottoman officials about Russian expansion into Crimea and the establishment of naval bases in the Black Sea, discussions that could affect the balance of power throughout Europe. The missing documents included detailed maps of proposed territorial boundaries, assessments of Ottoman military capabilities, and correspondence with other European powers about their positions on Russian expansion. Such information would be valuable to any nation seeking to understand or influence Russian foreign policy. General Gudovich, who else knew about the specific content of Prince Volkonsky's negotiations? The diplomatic mission was highly classified. Besides the prince himself, only Empress Catherine, Foreign Minister Bezborodko, and perhaps 2 or 3 senior advisors were fully informed about the negotiations. What about foreign diplomats? Could any of them have learned about the mission? Several foreign ambassadors have been trying to gather intelligence about our southern expansion plans. The French, Austrian, and Prussian representatives have all been particularly interested in our Ottoman negotiations. Each of these foreign powers had different reasons for opposing or supporting Russian expansion. France traditionally allied with the Ottoman Empire against Russian growth, while Austria and Prussia had complex relationships with Russia that could be affected by changes in the balance of power. Count Sheremetev decided to begin his investigation with the court officials who had been most closely involved with Prince Volkonsky's diplomatic work. His first interview was with Foreign Minister Alexander Bezborodko, one of Catherine's most trusted advisors and the architect of much of her foreign policy. Bezborodko received him in his office in the Foreign Ministry, surrounded by maps, diplomatic correspondence, and reports from Russian ambassadors throughout Europe. The foreign minister was a man of 45 with the sophisticated manner and multilingual skills that characterized Catherine's diplomatic corps. Count Sheremetev, Prince Volkonsky's death is a serious loss to our diplomatic efforts. He was one of our most skilled negotiators, particularly effective in dealing with Ottoman officials. Minister Bezborodko, I understand the prince was involved in highly sensitive negotiations. Could his death be connected to his diplomatic activities? It's certainly possible. The territorial adjustments we've been discussing with the Ottomans could affect the interests of several European powers. Any of them might benefit from disrupting our negotiations. Which powers would be most opposed to Russian expansion in the south? France has traditionally supported Ottoman resistance to Russian growth. Austria is concerned about Russian influence in the Balkans. Even Britain, despite our current alliance, might prefer to limit Russian access to warm water ports. Did Prince Volkonsky express any concerns about threats to his safety? He mentioned receiving approaches from foreign representatives who were trying to gather intelligence about his mission. But Dmitry was experienced in such matters and knew how to handle foreign attempts at espionage. What kind of approaches? Social invitations, offers of friendship, attempts to engage him in conversations about his work? The usual methods that diplomats use to gather information from each other. Minister, where were you on the night Prince Volkonsky was killed? At home with my family, reviewing reports from our ambassadors in Vienna and Berlin. My wife and servants can confirm my presence throughout the evening. Bezborodko's alibi seemed credible, but as foreign minister, he would have had access to all of Volkonsky's diplomatic correspondence and could have arranged for the murder to be carried out by agents or foreign allies. Count Sheremetev's next interview was with Prince Grigory Potemkin, Catherine's former lover and current chief advisor on southern expansion. Potemkin was one of the most powerful men in Russia, with virtually unlimited authority over military and civilian affairs in the empire's southern regions. Potemkin received him at his palace, a magnificent building that rivaled the Winter Palace in its luxury and grandeur. The prince was a man of 44 with the flamboyant personality and enormous ambition that had made him both Catherine's intimate partner and her most effective administrator. Count Sheremetev, poor Dmitry's death comes at a most inconvenient time. We were depending on his expertise to finalize the Ottoman agreements before the spring campaign season. Prince Potemkin, could Volkonsky's death be connected to opposition to your southern expansion plans? There are certainly those who would prefer to see our expansion delayed or abandoned entirely. Both foreign powers and domestic critics have reasons to disrupt our Ottoman negotiations. What domestic critics are you referring to? Some court officials believe that southern expansion is too expensive and risky, that we should consolidate our existing territories rather than seeking new conquests. Could such opposition lead to murder? In Russian politics, Count, any position can lead to extreme measures if the stakes are high enough. The southern expansion will determine Russia's position in Europe for generations to come. Prince, did Volkonsky discuss any specific threats or concerns with you? He mentioned that several foreign diplomats had been unusually interested in his social activities and had been asking indirect questions about his recent travels. What kind of questions? Inquiries about Ottoman attitudes toward territorial adjustments, assessments of Ottoman military capabilities, discussions about potential Russian naval bases in the Black Sea. Where were you when Prince Volkonsky was killed? At the Hermitage with Empress Catherine, discussing plans for her art collection and reviewing architectural proposals for new palace construction. Her Majesty can confirm my presence. Potemkin's alibi was unassailable, given that it involved the Empress herself, but as the most powerful advocate for southern expansion, he could have had agents who would eliminate obstacles to his plans. The investigation took a different direction when Count Sheremetev learned that Prince Volkonsky had been romantically involved with Countess Maria Narishkina, one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting and a prominent figure in St. Petersburg society. Countess Narishkina was a woman of 30 with the beauty and sophistication that characterized the most successful court ladies. Her position gave her access to imperial secrets and connections throughout European high society, making her both influential and potentially dangerous. She received Count Sheremetev in her apartments near the palace, surrounded by the luxury and artistic treasures that reflected her status as one of Russia's most prominent noblewomen. Count Sheremetev, Dmitri's death has left me devastated. He was not only my lover, but my closest friend and confidant. Countess, I must ask about the nature of your relationship with Prince Volkonsky. Did it involve discussions of his diplomatic work? Dmitri sometimes shared his concerns about the pressures he faced in his negotiations. He was particularly worried about foreign attempts to gather intelligence about his mission. What kind of foreign attempts? Several foreign diplomats had approached me, apparently hoping to use our relationship to gain access to information about Dmitri's work. Which diplomats made such approaches? The French ambassador, Count Segur, had been particularly persistent in his invitations and his subtle questions about Dmitri's activities. The Austrian representative, Prince Kobenzl, had also shown unusual interest in our social activities. Both men were indeed experienced diplomats who would have strong interest in Russian expansion plans and the skills necessary to conduct espionage operations. Countess, did you provide any information to these foreign representatives? I would never betray Russian interests or Dmitri's trust, but I may have inadvertently revealed details about his schedule or his concerns through casual conversation. What concerns did Prince Volkonsky express to you? He was worried that someone was intercepting his correspondence or monitoring his meetings. Dmitri felt that his negotiations were being compromised by information leaks. Did he suspect anyone specifically? He mentioned concerns about certain court officials who seemed unusually well informed about his diplomatic activities. Countess, where were you when Prince Volkonsky was killed? At a reception at the French embassy, along with many other members of court society. Count Segur can confirm my presence throughout the evening. The French embassy reception provided an interesting alibi, as it placed the Countess in the company of one of the primary suspects in the case. Count Sheremetev decided to investigate the foreign diplomatic community more thoroughly, beginning with the French ambassador who had been showing particular interest in Russian expansion plans. Count Louis-Philippe de Segur was one of Europe's most accomplished diplomats, representing French interests at the court of Catherine II during a period of complex Franco-Russian relations. His embassy was located in one of St. Petersburg's most elegant palaces, reflecting France's status as a major European power. Segur was a man of 40 with a sophisticated manner and cultural refinement that characterized the French aristocracy. His mission required balancing French opposition to Russian expansion with the need to maintain diplomatic relations with one of Europe's most powerful rulers. Count Sheremetev. Prince Volkonsky's death is indeed tragic. He was a skilled diplomat who understood the complexities of European politics. Ambassador Segur, I understand you had been interested in learning about Prince Volkonsky's recent diplomatic activities. As a representative of French interests, I naturally sought to understand Russian policies that could affect European stability. But such inquiries are normal diplomatic practice. What specific information were you seeking about Russian expansion plans? France has traditional interests in maintaining the balance of power in southeastern Europe. We were concerned about the implications of Russian territorial gains for our Ottoman allies. Did you make any direct approaches to Prince Volkonsky about his negotiations? I had several conversations with the prince at social gatherings, but nothing that went beyond normal diplomatic discourse. What about indirect approaches through other court figures? Segur hesitated before answering. Diplomatic work sometimes requires gathering information through various channels, but I would never engage in activities that violated diplomatic protocols. Ambassador, where were you when Prince Volkonsky was murdered? Hosting a reception at my embassy for members of the diplomatic corps and Russian court society. Many people can confirm my presence throughout the evening. While Segur's alibi seemed solid, Count Sheremetev noted that as an experienced diplomat, the French ambassador would have had the skills and resources to arrange for the murder to be carried out by agents while maintaining his own apparent innocence. The investigation of Prince Kobenzl, the Austrian representative, revealed similar patterns of intelligence gathering and diplomatic maneuvering. Austria's complex relationship with Russia, sometimes allied, sometimes opposed, created incentives for careful monitoring of Russian expansion plans. But the breakthrough in the case came when Count Sheremetev discovered that someone had been systematically copying Prince Volkonsky's diplomatic correspondence and selling the information to multiple foreign powers. This discovery emerged when he found discrepancies between the dates on certain documents and the watermarks on the paper, suggesting that copies had been made using materials from different sources. The trail led to Alexei Orlov, a junior clerk in the foreign ministry who had access to diplomatic correspondence and who had been living beyond his apparent means. When confronted with evidence of his espionage activities, Orlov initially denied involvement, but eventually confessed to both the intelligence theft and the murder. "I never intended to kill Prince Volkonsky," Orlov admitted. "I had been copying his correspondence for several months, selling information to French, Austrian, and Prussian agents." "Why did you decide to murder him?" The prince had become suspicious about information leaks and was conducting his own investigation. He had narrowed down the possible sources to a few people, including myself. What happened on the night of the murder? I went to his apartments to retrieve some documents I had copied but not yet returned. Prince Volkonsky discovered me and realized that I was the source of the intelligence leaks. "How did you kill him?" "I had been carrying arsenic as protection against discovery. A quick death seemed preferable to the disgrace and punishment that would follow exposure as a traitor. When the prince threatened to expose me, I put the poison in his wine." "What did you do with the stolen documents?" "I took the most sensitive materials and delivered them to my foreign contacts as planned. The information was too valuable to waste, even after the murder." The confession revealed that Prince Volkonsky had been killed not as part of a major international conspiracy, but by a minor official whose greed had led him to betray state secrets and ultimately to commit murder to avoid detection. The investigation also revealed the extent of foreign intelligence operations in St. Petersburg, as Orlov's activities had involved agents from multiple European powers who were competing for information about Russian expansion plans. The trial of Alexei Orlov was conducted with the efficiency and severity characteristic of Russian justice under Catherine II. The clerk was convicted of treason and murder and sentenced to death, while the foreign diplomats who had purchased stolen information were declared persona non grata and expelled from Russia. The case established important precedents for protecting diplomatic secrets and identifying security vulnerabilities within the Russian government bureaucracy. For the Russian Empire, Prince Volkonsky's murder highlighted the challenges of conducting sensitive diplomacy while under constant surveillance by foreign intelligence services. Count Sheremetev's investigation enhanced his reputation as an investigator capable of unraveling complex international conspiracies while protecting Russian state interests. The case also demonstrated the ongoing challenges of managing an empire where foreign intrigue, domestic ambition, and personal greed intersected in dangerous ways. Catherine II used the investigation to implement new security procedures for diplomatic correspondence and to review the loyalty and financial circumstances of government officials with access to sensitive information. In his final report to the Empress, Count Sheremetev wrote, "The murder of Prince Volkonsky demonstrates that even the most trusted servants of the crown can be corrupted by foreign gold and personal ambition. The empire must remain vigilant against those who would betray Russian interests for personal gain." The case became part of the complex history of Catherine's reign, illustrating both the international respect that Russia had achieved under her rule and the constant threats that great powers faced from espionage and internal betrayal. Prince Volkonsky's diplomatic work was continued by other officials who implemented new security measures to protect sensitive negotiations from foreign intelligence gathering. The investigation had revealed the sophisticated espionage networks that operated in 18th century European capitals, where information was a commodity that could be bought and sold by those willing to betray their countries for personal profit. Count Sheremetev continued to serve Catherine for many more years, investigating cases that ranged from court intrigue to foreign espionage. But the Volkonsky case remained one of his most complex, a reminder that in the glittering world of Imperial Russia, danger could come from the most unexpected sources. The Empress's shadow had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Russian society, but through careful investigation and decisive action, the threat to imperial security had been eliminated, and the traitors brought to justice. In the magnificent capital of St. Petersburg, where European civilization met Russian ambition, the memory of Prince Volkonsky's sacrifice and the lessons learned from his murder continued to influence those who served the crown. Understanding that loyalty to the empire required constant vigilance against the enemies who sought to destroy Russian greatness from within. Story 4. The Philosopher's Poison. Athens, Greek city-state, third year of the 85th Olympiad, 438 BC. Archon Cleisthenes adjusted his hymation against the cool morning breeze as he walked through the agora toward the Stoa Poikilo, where the most urgent matters of Athenian justice were deliberated. At 45, he served as one of Athens's chief magistrates, responsible for investigating crimes that touched upon the complex political, intellectual, and religious life of the world's first democracy. The wax tablet that had summoned him from his morning offerings to Athena bore news that threatened to shake the foundations of Athenian intellectual life. The message was inscribed in careful Greek letters: to Archon Cleisthenes, guardian of justice and defender of the laws. A grave matter has occurred that requires your immediate attention. Anaxagoras of Clazomene, the philosopher and teacher, has been found dead in his house under circumstances that suggest neither accident nor natural death. Given his prominence in our intellectual community and his connections to Pericles, this matter must be resolved with both wisdom and discretion. Anaxagoras was indeed one of Athens's most celebrated thinkers, a philosopher whose revolutionary ideas about the nature of the cosmos had influenced a generation of Athenian intellectuals. His teachings about the mind, nous, as the organizing principle of the universe, his explanations of natural phenomena through rational inquiry rather than divine intervention, and his friendship with Pericles had made him both famous and controversial in a city where traditional religious beliefs still held powerful sway. Athens in 438 BC was at the height of its golden age, the dominant power in the Greek world, and the center of an intellectual and artistic flowering that would influence Western civilization for millennia. The city's 250,000 inhabitants included not only Athenian citizens, but also metics, resident foreigners, slaves, and visitors from throughout the Mediterranean who came to study, trade, or seek their fortunes in the world's most dynamic city-state. Cleisthenes had risen from the ranks of the middle class to become one of Athens's most respected magistrates through his mastery of Athenian law, his reputation for fairness in legal proceedings, and his ability to navigate the complex factional politics that characterized democratic governance. His investigations required understanding not only criminal behavior, but also the philosophical, religious, and political currents that shaped Athenian society. The case would be particularly sensitive because Anaxagoras's controversial teachings had already made him enemies among conservative religious authorities who viewed his rationalist approach to natural phenomena as impious. Any investigation would need to balance the pursuit of justice with the political realities of a democracy where public opinion could be as dangerous as criminal conspiracy. The agora bustled with the morning activities that made Athens the commercial and intellectual center of the Greek world. Merchants from across the Mediterranean displayed their wares, philosophers debated in the shade of the colonnades, and citizens gathered to discuss the political issues that would be decided in the ecclesia, the democratic assembly where all adult male citizens could participate in governing their city. Anaxagoras's house was located in the fashionable district near the Acropolis, where successful metics and wealthy citizens maintained residences that reflected both prosperity and intellectual sophistication. The building was constructed in the typical Greek style, with rooms arranged around a central courtyard that provided light and air while maintaining privacy from the busy streets outside. Cleisthenes was met at the house by Dionysios, a young student of Anaxagoras, who had discovered the body when he arrived for his morning lesson. Dionysios was clearly distraught, as Anaxagoras had been not only his teacher, but a father figure who had guided his intellectual development. Archon Cleisthenes, this is a terrible day for all who love wisdom and learning. Master Anaxagoras was not only a great philosopher, but a kind and generous teacher who shared his knowledge freely with anyone seeking truth. Dionysios, please describe the circumstances in which you found Anaxagoras's body. I arrived at the usual time for my morning lesson and found the courtyard door unlocked, which was unusual. When I called out and received no answer, I entered and found the master in his study, slumped over his writing table. Did you notice anything else unusual about the scene? There was an overturned cup of wine beside his writing materials, and some of his scrolls appeared to have been disturbed, but nothing seemed to be missing from his collection of books and instruments. Who else had access to Anaxagoras' house? The master lived alone, preferring solitude for his philosophical work, but he received many visitors, students, fellow philosophers, and sometimes prominent citizens who sought his counsel on various matters. This suggested that the killer was likely someone who knew Anaxagoras' habits and had legitimate reasons for visiting his house, making the investigation more complex than a simple case of robbery or random violence. Cleisthenes examined the study where Anaxagoras had died, noting details that might reveal the identity of the killer or the motive for the crime. The room reflected the philosopher's interests and scholarly pursuits. Scrolls containing the works of earlier thinkers, geometric instruments for mathematical calculations, and astronomical devices for observing celestial movements. Anaxagoras' body showed no signs of violence or struggle, suggesting that he had been poisoned rather than killed by more direct means. The philosopher was a man of perhaps 70, with the lean build and thoughtful expression that characterized someone who had devoted his life to intellectual pursuits rather than physical activities. The overturned wine cup suggested the method of poison delivery, while the disturbed scrolls indicated that the killer had been searching for specific documents, possibly related to Anaxagoras' controversial teachings or his connections to prominent political figures. Dionysios, what was your master working on in recent days? Were there any particular projects or controversies that might have created enemies? Master Anaxagoras had been writing a treatise on the nature of the celestial bodies, arguing that the sun is a red-hot stone larger than the Peloponnese, and that the moon shines by reflected light rather than its own illumination. Such ideas were indeed controversial in Athens, where traditional religious beliefs held that celestial bodies were divine beings rather than natural objects. Anaxagoras' rationalist explanations of natural phenomena had previously led to charges of impiety, and his teachings continued to offend conservative religious authorities. Had anyone threatened him recently about these teachings? There had been grumbling from some of the priests and traditional religious leaders who felt that his explanations of natural phenomena undermined respect for the gods. But the master had faced such criticism before without serious consequences. What about his political connections? I understand he was a friend and advisor to Pericles. Master Anaxagoras had indeed advised Pericles on various matters, and their friendship was well known throughout Athens. Some of Pericles' political opponents had used this relationship to attack both the master's teachings and Pericles' policies. This political dimension added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Anaxagoras' murder could be connected to the broader factional struggles that characterized Athenian democracy, where personal attacks and character assassination were common tactics used by political rivals. Cleisthenes decided to begin his investigation by interviewing the key figures who had been involved in recent controversies surrounding Anaxagoras' teachings. His first meeting was with Meletos, a conservative religious leader who had been vocal in his criticism of rationalist philosophy. Meletos was a man of 50 with the stern manner and traditional dress that marked him as a defender of ancestral customs and religious orthodoxy. He maintained a following among Athenians who were uncomfortable with the intellectual innovations that characterized the city's golden age. Archon Cleisthenes, while I deeply regret any loss of human life, I cannot say I am surprised by this development. Anaxagoras' impious teachings were bound to bring divine retribution. Meletos, what specific aspects of Anaxagoras' philosophy did you find objectionable? His explanations of celestial phenomena showed complete disrespect for the gods. To claim that the sun is merely a hot stone rather than the divine Helios is blasphemy that undermines the very foundations of our religious traditions. Did you consider Anaxagoras a threat to Athenian religious life? His teachings confused young people and made them question the wisdom of their ancestors. Such intellectual arrogance is dangerous to the stability of our city. Did you ever approach Anaxagoras directly about your concerns? I attempted to reason with him on several occasions, explaining that his theories were harmful to public morality and religious observance, but he was too proud to acknowledge the dangers of his philosophy. Miletus, where were you last evening when Anaxagoras was killed? At home with my family, studying religious texts and preparing for this morning's sacrifices. My wife and household slaves can confirm my presence. Despite his obvious hostility to Anaxagoras' teachings, Miletus seemed genuinely shocked by the philosopher's death and showed no signs of personal involvement in violence. Cleisthenes' next interview was with Cleon, a prominent politician who had been using attacks on intellectuals and their foreign ideas as part of his campaign to build popular support among conservative Athenians. Cleon was a man of 40 with the aggressive manner and populist rhetoric that characterized successful democratic politicians in Athens. His political strategy involved appealing to traditional values and suspicion of intellectual innovation. Archon Cleisthenes, Anaxagoras' death is regrettable, but it may serve as a warning to other foreign philosophers who come to Athens spreading ideas that corrupt our young people. Cleon, what was your assessment of Anaxagoras' influence on Athenian society? Foreign philosophers like Anaxagoras teach our citizens to question everything, including the gods, the laws, and the customs that have made Athens great. Such intellectual arrogance weakens our democracy. Did you view him as a political threat as well as a cultural one? Anaxagoras' friendship with Pericles gave dangerous ideas political influence. When philosophers become the advisors of political leaders, the result is policies that ignore the will of the people. Did you ever call publicly for action against Anaxagoras? I have argued that Athens should be more careful about which foreign intellectuals we allow to influence our citizens, but I always advocated for legal methods of addressing such concerns. Cleon, where were you when Anaxagoras was murdered? At a political gathering, discussing campaign strategies with my supporters. Many citizens can confirm my presence throughout the evening. While Cleon's political hostility to Anaxagoras was clear, his alibi seemed credible, and his manner suggested someone more interested in using the philosopher as a political target than in eliminating him through violence. The investigation took a different direction when Cleisthenes learned that Anaxagoras had been involved in a dispute with another philosopher, Diogenes of Apollonia, over priority in developing certain cosmological theories. This information came from Socrates, the young philosopher who had been studying with various Athenian intellectuals and who was familiar with the scholarly disputes that characterized the city's intellectual community. Archon Cleisthenes, the relationship between Master Anaxagoras and Diogenes, had become quite strained over questions of intellectual priority and the proper interpretation of natural phenomena. Socrates, what was the nature of their dispute? Both philosophers had developed theories about the role of air in cosmological processes, and each claimed that the other had borrowed ideas without proper acknowledgement. How serious were these disagreements? More serious than they should have been, given that both men were seekers of truth. But intellectual pride can be as dangerous as any other form of ambition. Did you observe any hostility between them personally? There were heated exchanges at public lectures and some rather sharp written criticisms. The dispute had begun to affect their reputations and their ability to attract students. Such scholarly rivalries were indeed common in Athens's competitive intellectual environment, where philosophers depended on reputation and student fees for their livelihood. Cleisthenes interviewed Diogenes of Apollonia at his residence in the Kerameikos district, where many medics and foreign intellectuals maintained modest households while pursuing their scholarly work. Diogenes was a man of 50 with the intense manner of someone completely absorbed in philosophical speculation. His house was filled with scrolls, astronomical instruments, and the various materials needed for scientific observation and theoretical work. Diogenes, the death of Anaxagoras, is a loss to the entire philosophical community. Despite your recent disagreements, he was a significant thinker. Indeed, Archon, while we had our differences about certain theoretical matters, I respected Anaxagoras' contributions to natural philosophy. What were the specific issues that created tensions between you? We disagreed about the role of air in cosmological processes and the proper methods for investigating natural phenomena. Such disputes are common among philosophers. Did these disagreements become personal rather than purely intellectual? I regret that our scholarly debate may have become more heated than was appropriate. Competition for students and recognition can sometimes corrupt even philosophical discourse. Did you feel that Anaxagoras had treated you unfairly in these disputes? I felt that he had not given proper credit to my contributions to certain theories. But such issues should be resolved through reasoned argument, not through other means. Diogenes, where were you when Anaxagoras was murdered? At the Lyceum, participating in a philosophical discussion about the nature of knowledge. Several other philosophers can confirm my presence. Despite the scholarly rivalry, Diogenes seemed genuinely saddened by Anaxagoras' death and showed no signs of having escalated their intellectual disputes to violence. The breakthrough in the case came when Cleisthenes discovered that Anaxagoras had been working on a secret project that involved documenting the private conversations and activities of prominent Athenian politicians, including material that could be used to damage their reputations or political careers. This information emerged when he found hidden compartments in Anaxagoras' study containing scrolls with detailed observations about the personal habits, financial dealings, and political strategies of various public figures. Dionysios, did your master ever discuss gathering information about Athenian political leaders? Master Anaxagoras was interested in all aspects of human behavior as part of his philosophical investigations. He believed that understanding political psychology was as important as understanding natural phenomena. Was he planning to make this information public? I don't think so. The master seemed to view it as private research that helped him understand the relationship between individual character and political behavior. Did anyone else know about this research? I'm not certain. Master Anaxagoras was very discreet about his more sensitive investigations. The hidden documents reveal that Anaxagoras had been systematically observing and recording the private activities of several prominent Athenians, including evidence of corruption, personal scandals, and political conspiracies that could destroy careers and influence major policy decisions. Most significantly, the documents included detailed information about Nicias, the wealthy conservative politician who had been positioning himself as an alternative to Pericles' leadership of Athens. The records showed that Nicias had been secretly negotiating with Spartan representatives about potential peace terms that would involve significant Athenian concessions, information that would be devastating if made public during a period of ongoing military tension between the two city-states. When confronted with evidence of these secret negotiations, Nicias initially denied any improper activities, but eventually admitted to both the unauthorized diplomacy and the murder of Anaxagoras. I never intended to kill the old philosopher, Nicias confessed. I went to his house to try to convince him to destroy the documents he had compiled about my activities. What happened during your confrontation? Anaxagoras refused to destroy the documents, claiming that they were part of his philosophical research into political behavior. He said that truth was more important than political careers. So you decided to poison him? I panicked. If the information about my negotiations with the Spartans became public, it would not only destroy my political career, but could be interpreted as treason against Athens. How did you administer the poison? I had brought hemlock as a final resort if Anaxagoras refused to cooperate. When he remained inflexible, I put it in his wine during our discussion. What did you do with the incriminating documents? I took them and burned them immediately, but I realize now that Anaxagoras may have shared the information with others. The confession revealed that Anaxagoras had been killed not for his philosophical teachings, but for his political observations that threatened to expose secret negotiations that could be viewed as treasonous. The investigation also revealed the extent of Anaxagoras' informal intelligence gathering activities, which had involved careful observation of Athenian political life and the accumulation of information that could influence major policy decisions. The trial of Nicias was conducted according to Athenian legal procedures, with a jury of citizens determining guilt and appropriate punishment. The case highlighted complex issues involving the relationship between intellectual inquiry, political privacy, and democratic governance. The prosecution argued that Nicias had committed both murder and treason, having killed an innocent philosopher to conceal unauthorized negotiations with Athens' primary enemy. The defense claimed that Nicias' diplomatic contacts had been exploratory rather than treasonous, and that his actions had been motivated by legitimate concerns about protecting Athens from unnecessary military conflict. The jury ultimately convicted Nicias of murder and sentenced him to death by hemlock poisoning, the same method he had used to kill Anaxagoras. However, the treason charges were reduced to unauthorized diplomacy, reflecting the jury's recognition that his secret negotiations might have been motivated by genuine concern for Athenian welfare. The case established important precedents for protecting intellectual freedom while also defining the limits of political information gathering by private individuals. For the Athenian intellectual community, Anaxagoras' murder served as a reminder of the dangerous intersections between philosophy, politics, and personal ambition in a democratic society where information could be as powerful as military force. Cleisthenes' investigation enhanced his reputation as a magistrate capable of unraveling complex political conspiracies while protecting the intellectual freedom that made Athens the center of Greek civilization. The case also demonstrated the ongoing tensions between traditional religious beliefs and rationalist philosophy, though it revealed that the immediate threat to Anaxagoras had come from political rather than religious sources. Pericles used the investigation to strengthen his political position by exposing his rival's secret negotiations with Sparta, while also implementing new protections for philosophers and other intellectuals who contributed to Athenian cultural life. In his final report to the Athenian Assembly, Cleisthenes wrote, "The murder of Anaxagoras demonstrates that intellectual inquiry must be protected from those who would use violence to suppress inconvenient truths. Athens' greatness depends upon our commitment to both democratic governance and the free pursuit of knowledge." The case became part of Athenian legal and intellectual history, serving as an example of how democratic institutions could protect both political accountability and intellectual freedom when they were threatened by those who preferred secrecy to transparency. Anaxagoras was succeeded in his philosophical work by younger thinkers who continued his rationalist approach to natural phenomena, while being more careful about their involvement in political observation and commentary. The investigation had revealed the sophisticated information networks that operated in democratic Athens, where political intelligence could determine the outcome of elections and policy debates. Socrates, who had provided crucial information about the philosophical community's internal dynamics, used the case as an example in his later teachings about the importance of pursuing truth regardless of personal or political consequences. The case also highlighted the challenges facing Athens as it attempted to balance democratic participation with the need for effective diplomacy and military strategy in a competitive international environment. Cleisthenes continued to serve as an archon for many more years, investigating cases that range from simple theft to complex political conspiracies. But the Anaxagoras case remained one of his most intellectually challenging, a reminder that in democratic Athens, the pursuit of truth could be as dangerous as it was noble. The philosopher's poison had claimed the life of one of Athens' greatest thinkers, but the investigation had also revealed the importance of protecting intellectual freedom and political accountability in a society that depended upon both wisdom and justice for its continued prosperity. In the great city of Athens, where democracy and philosophy were transforming human civilization, the memory of Anaxagoras and the lessons learned from his murder continued to influence those who understood that the pursuit of truth required both courage and wisdom, even when such pursuits led to uncomfortable revelations about the powerful and the ambitious. Story 5, The Cattleman's Code, Dodge City, Kansas, August 1878. Sheriff Bat Masterson adjusted his Colt .45 as he walked down Front Street through the dust and noise of another busy day in America's wildest cattle town. At 24, he had already earned a reputation as one of the most effective lawmen on the frontier, responsible for maintaining order in a city where Texas cowboys, professional gamblers, buffalo hunters, and railroad workers mixed with merchants, saloon keepers, and the various characters who made their living from the cattle trade. The telegram that had summoned him from his morning rounds was brief but urgent. Sheriff Masterson, urgent matter at Delmonico Restaurant. Cattle Baron James Harrison found dead. Circumstances suspicious. Come immediately. Doc Holliday. The message was signed by the legendary gambler and gunfighter who served as the town's unofficial coroner when medical expertise was needed. James Harrison was indeed one of the most prominent figures in the cattle industry, owner of the Double H Ranch in Texas, and one of the largest suppliers of beef to the Kansas railheads, that shipped cattle to markets in Chicago and the East. His death could affect not only Dodge City's economy, but the entire system of cattle drives that had made the town the cowboy capital of the world. Dodge City in August 1878 was at the height of its wild reputation, a bustling frontier town of 8,000 permanent residents that swelled to twice that number during the cattle driving season. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad had made Dodge City the terminus for cattle drives from Texas, creating a boomtown where enormous amounts of money changed hands and where violence was as common as the ever-present dust. Masterson had come to Dodge City as a buffalo hunter, served as a scout for the Army during conflicts with native tribes, and been elected sheriff when the town needed someone with both the courage and the skills necessary to maintain order among armed men who had spent months on the trail and were ready to celebrate their arrival in civilization. The case would be particularly challenging because the cattle trade involved complex relationships between Texas ranchers, Kansas businessmen, railroad companies, and the various intermediaries who facilitated the movement of millions of dollars worth of livestock through the frontier economy. Any crime involving a major cattle baron could have far-reaching implications for the entire regional economy. The Delmonico restaurant was one of Dodge City's most respectable establishments, a place where successful cattlemen, railroad executives, and prominent local businessmen could dine in relative comfort and privacy away from the chaos of the saloons and gambling halls that characterize the town's more notorious districts. Doc Holliday met Masterson at the restaurant entrance, his pale complexion and expensive clothes marking him as a man who made his living with his wits rather than his physical strength. Despite his reputation as a deadly gunfighter, Holliday was also an educated man whose knowledge of medicine and law made him valuable in situations requiring more than simple frontier justice. Bat, this is a peculiar situation. Harrison's been poisoned, but it's been done so skillfully that it might have been mistaken for a heart attack if I hadn't examined the body carefully. What kind of poison, Doc? Strychnine, most likely, administered in small doses over several hours. Harrison would have felt increasingly ill, but might not have realized he was being murdered until it was too late. Any idea how the poison was administered? Probably in his food or drink. Harrison had dinner here last night with several business associates, and he was seen drinking at the Long Branch Saloon afterward. This meant that multiple people could have had opportunity to poison Harrison, making the investigation more complex than a simple case of frontier violence. Masterson examined the scene where Harrison's body had been discovered. The cattle baron had been found in his hotel room at the Dodge House, the town's finest lodging establishment, where visiting businessmen stayed when conducting cattle transactions. Harrison was a man of perhaps 55, with the weathered appearance and substantial build of someone who had spent decades building a ranching empire in the harsh environment of the Texas frontier. His expensive clothes and gold watch chain reflected the wealth that successful cattle operations could generate in the booming post-Civil War economy. The hotel room showed no signs of struggle or robbery, suggesting that Harrison had been killed for reasons other than simple theft. His personal effects, including a significant amount of cash and valuable jewelry, remained untouched. Doc, what was Harrison doing in Dodge City? Was this a routine cattle sale or something more specific? From what I've heard, Harrison was negotiating a major deal that could have affected several other cattlemen's operations. He was also involved in some kind of dispute about water rights and grazing lands back in Texas. Both issues could provide motives for murder if Harrison's business activities had threatened other ranchers' interests, or if his negotiations in Dodge City had created enemies among local businessmen. Masterson decided to begin his investigation by examining Harrison's recent activities and business relationships. His first interview was with Tom McSween, the cattle buyer who had been negotiating with Harrison about purchasing the Double H Ranch's entire annual production. McSween was a man of 40 with the shrewd manner and careful dress of someone who made his living evaluating livestock and negotiating complex financial arrangements. His office near the stockyards was filled with contracts, shipping schedules, and correspondence that reflected the sophisticated business operations behind the apparently simple process of moving cattle from Texas to eastern markets. Sheriff Masterson, James Harrison's death is a real blow to the cattle trade. He was one of the most reliable suppliers and a man whose word was his bond in all business dealings. Tom, I understand you were negotiating a major purchase from Harrison's ranch. What was the nature of the deal? Harrison was offering to sell his entire annual production, about 20,000 head of cattle, at a fixed price that would guarantee delivery over the next 2 years. That sounds like a substantial contract. Were there any problems with the negotiations? The terms were generous for both sides, but there were some competitors who felt that Harrison's deal would set prices too low for other ranchers to match. What competitors were concerned about this? Mainly Sam Crawford, who owns the Flying Sea Ranch, and Bill Henderson from the Lazy H outfit. Both of them felt that Harrison's pricing would force them to accept lower profits for their own cattle. Did these concerns lead to direct conflicts with Harrison? There were heated discussions at the Cattlemen's Association meeting 2 days ago. Some hard words were exchanged about unfair competition and market manipulation. Tom, where were you last night when Harrison was poisoned? At the Long Branch Saloon with several other cattle buyers, playing poker until well past midnight. Plenty of witnesses can confirm my presence. Despite the apparent alibi, McSween's detailed knowledge of Harrison's business arrangements and his access to the victim during negotiations made him a potential suspect who would require further investigation. Masterson's next interview was with Sam Crawford, the rival rancher who had been vocal in his opposition to Harrison's pricing strategies. Crawford had come to Dodge City with his own herd and was staying at a smaller hotel while conducting his cattle sales. Crawford was a man of 50 with the hard-bitten appearance and aggressive manner of someone who had built his ranching operation through determination and willingness to fight for what he considered his due. His reputation as a tough businessman was matched by his skill with firearms, making him a potentially dangerous adversary. Sheriff, Harrison's death is unfortunate, but it might help restore some fairness to the cattle market. Sam, I understand you had serious disagreements with Harrison about cattle pricing. Harrison was undercutting the rest of us by offering prices that would drive smaller ranchers out of business. His deal would have set a precedent that could have ruined half the cattlemen in Texas. Did you consider Harrison's actions a direct threat to your operation? I considered them unfair competition that violated the informal agreements we've maintained to keep cattle prices stable and profitable for all legitimate ranchers. What did you plan to do about Harrison's competitive pricing? I was organizing other ranchers to collectively refuse to sell at his reduced prices, forcing buyers to pay fair market rates for quality cattle. Sam, did you threaten Harrison directly about his business practices? I told him that his pricing strategy was destructive to the entire industry and that other ranchers wouldn't tolerate such unfair competition indefinitely. Where were you last night when Harrison was poisoned? At the Varieties Theater with several other ranchers, watching a stage show and discussing our response to Harrison's pricing strategy. Multiple people can verify my presence. Crawford's obvious hostility toward Harrison's business practices provided clear motive for murder, even if his alibi seemed credible. The investigation took a different direction when Masterson learned that Harrison had been involved in a complex dispute over water rights and grazing lands in Texas that could affect multiple ranching operations and had implications for railroad expansion and town development. This information came from Judge R.G. Cook, the county judge who handled legal matters involving property disputes and business conflicts that arose from the rapidly changing conditions in the cattle country. Sheriff Masterson, Harrison was involved in several legal matters that could have created serious enemies among people whose livelihoods depended on access to water and grazing lands. What kind of legal disputes? Harrison had been claiming exclusive water rights to several creek systems that other ranchers had been using for decades. His legal position was strong, but enforcing it would have bankrupted several smaller operations. Who was most affected by these water rights claims? The Peterson family, who run a small ranch downstream from Harrison's property, and Miguel Vasquez, a Mexican-American rancher whose family had been using those water sources since before Texas statehood. Were these disputes heading to court? Harrison was pressing for legal resolution that would have established his exclusive rights, while the other ranchers were seeking compromise solutions that would allow continued shared access. Judge, could these water rights disputes have motivated violence? In cattle country, water rights are literally matters of life and death for ranching operations. People have been killed for less than what was at stake in Harrison's legal actions. Both the Peterson family and Miguel Vasquez would have had strong motives for eliminating Harrison before his legal challenges could destroy their ranching operations. Masterson decided to investigate these Texas connections by interviewing the people who had traveled to Dodge City with information about the water rights disputes. He found Tom Peterson at a camp outside town where small ranchers were staying while they sold their cattle through local buyers. Peterson was a man of 35 with the lean build and worried expression of someone struggling to maintain a family ranching operation in an increasingly competitive industry. His modest equipment and small herd reflected the financial pressures facing ranchers who lacked the resources of major operations like Harrison's Double H Ranch. "Sheriff, I won't pretend to mourn Harrison's death. He was trying to destroy my family's livelihood through legal technicalities that ignored decades of traditional water usage." "Tom, how serious was the threat to your ranching operation?" "If Harrison had succeeded in his water rights claims, my cattle would have died of thirst and my family would have lost everything we've worked for over 3 generations. Did you try to negotiate with Harrison about sharing water access?" Harrison refused to discuss any compromise. He said that legal ownership was legal ownership and that traditional usage didn't matter under current law. "How did you plan to respond to his legal challenges?" "I was hoping to find a lawyer who could challenge Harrison's claims, but legal fees are expensive, and Harrison had much better lawyers than I could afford." "Tom, did you come to Dodge City specifically to confront Harrison?" "I came to sell my cattle and to try to convince Harrison that destroying smaller ranchers wasn't good for the long-term stability of the cattle industry." "Where were you last night when Harrison was poisoned?" "At the camp with my men, discussing our options for dealing with the water rights dispute. Several of my hands can confirm that I didn't leave the camp." Despite the apparent alibi, Peterson's desperate financial situation and his obvious resentment toward Harrison provided strong motives for murder. Miguel Vasquez presented a more complex case, as his family's water rights claims dated to the period when Texas was part of Mexico and involved legal questions about the validity of pre-statehood land grants and water usage agreements. Vasquez was a man of 40 with a dignified bearing and careful manner of someone who had learned to navigate the complicated relationships between Mexican-American families and the Anglo ranchers who had come to dominate the Texas cattle industry after statehood. "Sheriff Masterson, Senor Harrison's death is a tragedy, but his legal challenges were threatening to destroy not only my family's ranch, but our entire way of life." "Miguel, what was the basis of your family's water rights claims?" "My family received land grants from the Mexican government that included water rights to the creek systems that Harrison was trying to claim exclusively." "Did Harrison acknowledge the validity of your family's original grants?" "He claimed that the treaties ending the Mexican War had invalidated all previous land grants that weren't properly registered under Texas state law." "What would happen to your operation if Harrison's legal challenges succeeded?" "My family would lose our ranch and be forced to find other ways to make a living. 3 generations of work would be destroyed by legal technicalities." "Miguel, did you have any legal recourse against Harrison's claims?" "I was working with a lawyer in Austin who specialized in Mexican land grant cases, but such legal battles are expensive and uncertain." "Where were you when Harrison was poisoned?" "At the Mexican boarding house near the railroad station, meeting with other Mexican-American ranchers about forming a legal defense fund to fight water rights challenges." Vasquez's situation was complicated by the cultural and legal complexities of land ownership in a region where Mexican, Texas Republic, and U.S. legal systems had created overlapping and sometimes conflicting property rights. The breakthrough in the case came when Masterson discovered that someone had been systematically forging water rights documents and selling them to multiple parties, creating legal conflicts that would require expensive litigation to resolve and would benefit lawyers and land speculators at the expense of legitimate ranchers. This discovery emerged when he found discrepancies between different copies of water rights documents that were supposed to be identical but contained subtle variations that suggested forgery or alteration. The forged documents had been used to create artificial water rights disputes that would force small ranchers to sell their land at reduced prices to larger operations or speculators who could afford the legal costs of resolving the conflicting claims. Further investigation revealed that the forgery operation was being coordinated by Frank Warren, a lawyer from Austin who had been representing himself as a specialist in water rights law while actually creating the legal problems that generated his business. Warren had come to Dodge City ostensibly to help resolve the water rights disputes, but actually to ensure that the legal conflicts continued to generate profitable litigation for his law practice. When confronted with evidence of the forgery scheme, Warren initially denied involvement, but eventually confessed to both the document fraud and the murder of Harrison. "I never intended to kill Harrison," Warren admitted. "He had discovered discrepancies in some of the water rights documents and was threatening to expose the entire operation." "How did Harrison discover the forgeries?" "He was more knowledgeable about land law than I realized, and he noticed that some of the documents contained legal language that wasn't used during the time periods when they were supposedly created." "What happened when he confronted you about the forged documents?" "Harrison demanded that I stop creating false legal disputes and threatened to report my activities to the State Bar Association and law enforcement." "So you decided to poison him?" "I panicked. If Harrison had exposed the forgery operation, I would have faced both criminal charges and the loss of my legal practice." "How did you administer the strychnine?" "I put it in his coffee during our meeting at the restaurant. The poison acts slowly, so Harrison didn't realize immediately what was happening." "What did you plan to do after Harrison's death?" "I hoped that without his legal expertise and financial resources, the other ranchers would be forced to accept settlement agreements that would end the disputes without exposing my document forgeries." The confession revealed that Harrison had been killed not because of legitimate business competition or water rights disputes, but because of his integrity in refusing to tolerate systematic fraud that was destroying honest ranchers' livelihoods. The investigation also exposed the sophisticated criminal networks that could develop around legal and business systems, where professionals could exploit their expertise to create artificial conflicts that generated profits at the expense of legitimate businesses. The trial of Frank Warren was conducted according to Kansas territorial law, with a jury of Dodge City citizens determining guilt and appropriate punishment. The case highlighted complex issues involving professional ethics, legal fraud, and the abuse of legal expertise for criminal purposes. The prosecution argued that Warren had not only committed murder, but had also systematically defrauded multiple ranching families by creating false legal disputes that threatened their livelihoods. The defense claimed that Warren's document alterations had been intended to clarify confusing legal situations rather than to create fraud, and that Harrison's death had been unpremeditated. The jury ultimately convicted Warren of both murder and fraud, sentencing him to death for the killing and requiring him to make financial restitution to the ranchers who had been victimized by his forgery operation. The case established important precedents for protecting property rights and maintaining professional integrity in legal and business relationships on the frontier. For the cattle industry, Harrison's murder highlighted the importance of maintaining honest business practices and protecting the legal frameworks that made large-scale ranching operations possible. Masterson's investigation enhanced his reputation as a lawman, capable of solving complex white-collar crimes, as well as handling the violent conflicts that typically characterize frontier law enforcement. The case also demonstrated the sophisticated criminal schemes that could develop in frontier communities, where rapid economic growth created opportunities for both legitimate business and systematic fraud. The water rights disputes that had provided cover for Warren's criminal activities were eventually resolved through legitimate legal processes, with most ranchers retaining access to traditional water sources while acknowledging the need for more formal agreements about shared usage. In his final report, Masterson wrote, "The murder of James Harrison demonstrates that frontier justice must protect honest businessmen from those who would use professional expertise for criminal purposes. The cattle industry depends upon maintaining trust and legal integrity among all participants." The case became part of Dodge City's legal history, serving as an example of how systematic investigation could uncover complex fraud schemes while protecting the business relationships that made the cattle trade possible. Harrison's ranching operation was inherited by his family, who continued the Double H Ranch's reputation for honest dealing and fair business practices. The ranch became a model for the kind of ethical business operations that characterize the most successful cattle enterprises. The investigation had revealed how legal and business expertise could be corrupted for criminal purposes, But it had also shown that careful investigation and fair justice could protect honest entrepreneurs from systematic fraud. Tom Peterson and Miguel Vasquez were able to retain their water rights and continue their ranching operations, thanks to the exposure of Warren's document forgeries and the legal assistance provided by honest lawyers who helped resolve the legitimate aspects of the water rights disputes. Masterson continued to serve as sheriff of Dodge City for several more years, handling cases that ranged from simple saloon fights to complex business crimes. But the Harrison case remained one of his most intellectually challenging, a reminder that frontier law enforcement required understanding not only violence, but also the sophisticated criminal schemes that could develop in rapidly growing frontier economies. The Cattlemen's Code had been violated by someone who should have been protecting honest ranchers' interests, but through careful investigation and fair justice, the integrity of the cattle industry had been preserved and the criminals brought to account. In the wild cattle town of Dodge City, where fortunes were made and lost with each season's cattle drives, the memory of James Harrison and the lessons learned from his murder continued to influence business relationships and legal practices that helped transform the frontier from a place of chaos and violence into a foundation for legitimate economic development. Let the hush of the night wrap around you. And know this, some stories don't end. They drift, they dream, they wait for you to listen again. Good night.